Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you, especially to those of you who are joining very early in your morning, perhaps here along with me on the East Coast of the US. My name is Anand Varghese. I'm really proud and happy to lead this keynote session, I think the second for the day of day one of GDDF. I lead the Center for Digital Acceleration at DAI. DAI is an implementer of international development projects for donors around the world. And the center that I lead, the Center for Digital Acceleration, leads our portfolio of digital focused projects on cybersecurity focused projects. And we also help to integrate technology across our portfolio of development projects around the world. I'm joined today by Phil Howard and Lisa Schirch. I'm really proud to be joined by them. I'll give you a bit more about their bios in a second. But let me just kick off by framing our conversation a little bit, why we're gathered here. The title of our topic is really about rebuilding trust in the digital information environment. I am old enough to remember the promise of the early internet. And that promise was that, we were ushering in a digital revolution that would really trigger a kind of information revolution. It would democratize global production and consumption of news, of opinions, of data. But I think, as we're all aware, instead, really the changes in the architecture of people's information environment have really been accompanied in this era, especially over the last decade, by a deep strain of distrust in traditional institutions and sources of truth, whether those are media, universities, political institutions, etc. And that distrust often directly undermines our solutions to the world's most pressing problems like climate change, the global health crises that we've encountered and will likely encounter again in the future, democratic backsliding. How can we reknit the trust relationship really between users, between citizens, and the information environment that they live in? And what role can digital platforms, can governments, can academics, civil society, how can we all play a role in this task of reknitting that trust? And how can we redirect the power of these big digital platforms that we're all on towards increased consensus, towards increased trust, especially to tackle global challenges? That's what we're here to discuss today. And I couldn't really think of two people more appropriate, more steeped in these topics than Phil and Lisa. As a small autobiographical note, I don't know if they would remember me, but I remember them very early on in my career, about 15 years ago when I was with the US Institute of Peace. They were already experts, already deep in these topics. Dr. Phil Howard joins us from the UK, where he's a professor at Oxford, but also joining us in the capacity of president of the International Panel on the Information Environment. Among many awards and recognitions that he has received over the years, he's been named Global Thinker by Foreign Policy magazine, and NDI, the National Democratic Institute, awarded him their Democracy Prize for pioneering research into global misinformation trends. He's joined by Dr. Lisa Schirch, who's at the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. Her most recent book on social media impacts on conflict and democracy, The Tectonic Shift, was released in 2021. She's been doing research, thinking, and working as a practitioner, as a peace builder, in topics that are going to be really pertinent to our discussion today. And she has deep experience, as I said, as a practitioner in peace processes, design, mediation, facilitation, over 20 countries. I hope that gives you a small snapshot of the vast experience that both Lisa and Phil bring to the table. Just to kick off this conversation, I'd like to begin with a question really for Phil. Actually, before I do that, let me just tell you all as an audience, we will have a brief Q&A during the last 5 to 10 minutes of this conversation. So I'll be taking questions from the chat. Please pop them into the chat. I will be relayed those questions. Let us know who you are and give us a brief question so that I can put it to the audience and we can sort of enliven our discussion with your perspectives and your questions. I will remind you over the course of this conversation. All right. To Phil, help us perhaps just with some opening remarks to help us understand what this concept of the information environment is, Can you define it? And just help us understand the specific role that digital technology plays in both building and undermining trust in this environment. Technology isn't all of it, but I know it's a big part of this information environment.
Thank you, Anand. That's a fabulous question, and I guess a sensible starting point. For many researchers, at least, the information environment as a concept has three parts. We use it to refer to the information infrastructure itself, the landlines, the Wi-Fi infrastructure, the nodes that keep us connected, the tools that we use to share ideas, to create content. So that's first, the infrastructure. The information environment is also made up of content. So the second component is the concepts, the videos, the ideas, the messages, the news products that gets delivered over that infrastructure. So it's infrastructure and it's content. And then we actually need to have room for people and institutions in this definition. So it's technology designers, it's users, it's citizens and voters. It's also the technology firms in Silicon Valley and around the world that build all this stuff. So the information environment, it's a big concept, but it includes these three components: the infrastructure, the content, and the people and organizations that use it. And I think your instinct is right. It's this infrastructure, this content, these organizations can build out an information environment that is constructive and positive and affirming. Many of us remember the same internet that you do, and we still use it, right, to connect with family and friends, to learn about what's going on the other side of the planet. There's certainly some positive aspects to this information infrastructure, but it's also used to distribute junk, right? Junk news, misinformation. There's important relationships between technology use and mental health. We know a significant portion of the world's human trafficking is now coordinated over social media platforms. So there's this dark side to information infrastructure, these uses that we make of the infrastructure that result in trust, declining trust in our political leaders, declining trust in the institutions of society and in science and the technology itself.
Bill, if I might, before moving to Lisa, if I might just sort of ask you to flesh out perhaps what are the non-digital components of this? So how does what you described relate to, say, the media environment or newspapers or entertainment or those other kind of forms of engagement with a public sphere or information?
Well, that's a great question, in that many of us are worried about junk news that's online or the messages our kids are receiving over social media. But in many parts of the world, the primary media infrastructure is radio. It's the newspaper that's available on the corner that isn't printed in English or Spanish or a major language that has researchers looking at it. So we have to be inclusive for this definition. And part of the challenge is that sometimes the sources of misinformation or the people abusing the information infrastructure are our own leaders, right? Our own political leadership, or particular countries, particular governments that spend significant amounts of money on trying to degrade public conversation. So, we're now at the stage where we need a stronger offense. We've been working defensively. And the group I'm helping with, the International Panel on the Information Environment, we see our role as trying to inspect, monitor, and verify what it is that technology firms do, what it is that governments say they do, to try to make a healthier information environment.
Thank you, Phil. Moving over to you, Lisa. I sort of said in my opening or in my chat with Lisa and Phil before we started, I don't want to set up any artificial debates. I do know you have different perspectives on the topic of technology, but I would love to hear kind of, Lisa, how do you see the role of technology kind of playing out, especially in tackling complex problems that have a kind of global scale to them? And really, how are these technologies affecting global, national, and local institutions that are seeking to solve these problems?
Great. Thanks so much for that question. And I've been following Dr. Howard's work for many years, so I'm actually greatly influenced by it. And I think that the information environment and the analysis that he provides with his work is really central to my work of understanding conflicts and complex problems and what is making it so difficult for people in countries all over the world to be able to solve problems at this point, because disinformation, misinformation are really being incentivized by the design of most of the major tech platforms. And so actors who do want to put out information that is distracting, that can be, you know, a meme with a lie on it about some political leader to get a lot of hits and get a lot of clicks. The algorithms on Facebook, on X, they magnify that kind of thing. So it distracts people with disinformation. So but it's also distorting the information environment. So really, it's often only just 1% of users who are putting out this kind of information. And there are a lot of people on the internet who only just consume information. They're not speaking. And what we see is the information environment is then one of distraction and distortion rather than deliberation. And so it becomes very difficult for society to be able to really understand what the issues are and what they might have in common with other groups in society. In my book published in 2021, Social Media Impacts on Conflict and Democracy, we had 12 case studies from the global south of what was happening in Zimbabwe, in Kenya, in India, in Jordan. And we really had local journalists and peace-building experts talk about the way social media platforms in particular were distorting their information environment. We're making it more difficult. We're amplifying polarization, decreasing trust in governments, and just generally causing confusion. And you know, when the public is confused, this impacts elections. It impacts their even ability to want to participate with civic education or with civic engagement processes. So yeah, I think that really then we would see that the social media platforms, while not intentionally, because they are designed for profit, because this kind of extremist emotional content that is often false garners the most attention, that the profit motive is to keep people's attention with distracting, distorting information. And you know, the content moderation scheme around the world, the regulators focused on this. I think it's the wrong problem, and I can speak more about that later this session. But you know, really, we're in a bad shape right now because there are many factors affecting democracy and elections, but the information environment is really central to be able to have a functioning democracy that can solve problems. And until we fix our digital platforms, I think it'll be very hard to see a growth in democratic engagement around the world.
Thanks, Lisa. I might, take a little bit of a pause from a sort of defined path to dig in a little bit in that question about kind of the role of content moderation. Phil, the IPIE released a study for policymakers around the strategies for improving the global information environment, where you kind of outline a series of validated and endorsed and uncertain countermeasures that platforms or that sort of we can engage in. Content labeling and corrective information sort of have been validated as effective countermeasures. Content or account moderation only sort of it's endorsed, so that in my understanding a sort of an asterisk thumbs up. And then there's just all manner of advertisement policy, content reporting, etc., that just don't have any evidence behind them. Is that how I'm to understand them? And
I think you've got it right. And the important point there is that the research community, scientists are doing their best to keep up with the trends, to working with the little data that we get from the outside. And but we can still say some things, right? There are some things we can say positively. We know that content flagging works. If you show a user something that's suspicious, if you flag it as being from an unusual source, or even if the flagging occurs by other users on a platform, you're much more likely to increase trust. Users are much more likely to remember the high quality information. think about it, process it over a longer period. So, science is a journey, right? It's
Yeah.
not a list of facts, and there's a long list of policy options. We only have evidence about a few of them.
Right.
The one we know that works is the content flagging, as you say.
Thanks. Lisa, I would like to move back to you to really, I think we've gone from framing the problem to now thinking a little bit more about the solutions. And you've really been spending a lot of time researching what you term deliberative technology. I think that was the sort of topic of your most recent paper. I often think of deliberation as being a really messy human process. Help us to understand the concept of deliberative technology and tell me more about what the role of technology can be in decision making and consensus building.
Right. So deliberation is a process, and it's as old as human beings. So tribal communities and democracies around the world used deliberation as a way of sorting out information. It's about making sense of our information environment with dialogue between people of different opinions and different life experiences. So you're right, it can be messy, it can be long. What deliberative technologies are designed to do, and again, I focus really a lot on the design of tech platforms. These platforms are designed to help people listen to each other at scale. What that means is, thousands of people can be on a deliberative technology platform such as Polis, Remesh, Considerate, Decidem. There's a number of different platforms, but they are designed to help people be able to see and make sense of a wide variety of points of view that are being expressed. So some of these platforms really highlight different opinion groups and the commonalities between them, what they share, what their values are in common, but also what the differences are, where the minority voices are. So it can take a lot of information from a lot of people, and the technology through what we call computational democracy is really calculating and highlighting what the range of opinions are, what the pros and cons of different points of view are. And this kind of deliberative process really is aided by technology. And so, democracy has always been hard. The democracy is a very flawed system only when you compare it to all the others,
yes,
more flawed systems.
Yes.
So really, technology now enables us to have the kind of direct democracy that we really haven't been able to have as human beings before, because we have the power of computation and even artificial intelligence to be able to synthesize large numbers of people and what they think, and to really aid people in understanding each other.
Thanks, Lisa. You talked a little bit about AI, and I just want to go to a question from the chat from Jackie G. I think I'd love to get both of your perspectives on is how do we use emerging technology such as AI in civic education? How can we ensure that we're dealing with mis and disinformation? I'd perhaps like to zoom out a little bit from the particulars of that question to ask a little bit more about the role of AI in all of this. This is going to be a thread that runs through the entire GDDF conference for day 1 and day 2. Perhaps let's start with Phil. Are you encouraged by generative AI and all of the new AI technology that are emerging out in public for everybody to use, and that's also certainly being used within the industry? Does it worry you? Where do you sit?
Where do I sit? So I think I agree with Lisa in the sense that there are some wonderful creative applications that we should look forward to, that we should peg our hope to. Anything that builds empathy, that helps conversation, that helps small groups of people arrive at sensible decisions. I think AI is an important new tool in that toolkit. One of the challenges, of course, is that there are always actors eager to abuse the technologies that roll out. And we've seen a number of the technologies from the last, digital technologies from the last 15, 20 years, roll out without much thought from the designers. So there are ways you can design for democracy. There are ways you can design to remove or minimize racism and sexism in how you build and train an AI model. It's not clear that the firms do this. And in fact, every few years, there's a whistleblower, right, who comes out and says,
yes,
Yes, the technology firms replicate everything we find as independent researchers. They replicate these things internally and still don't make the design changes. So I do believe we're at a stage where it's time for some light touch public policy oversight, some
Sure.
guidance from the international community, some agenda setting or norms setting from the donor community that helps give engineers something to design to. In the ethnographic work we do, when we speak with engineers, most of them are quite happy to design and reimagine technologies in these creative ways, but they don't quite know. You need to point them in a direction. Maybe the SDGs, human rights norms, democratic values, we can offer these as good pegs, but there needs, at this point, we're past the point of industry self-regulation, right? We need some light touch guidance to make sure we get the best out of the tech that we're building.
Lisa, you've spoken, Lisa, in our opening conversation prior to this about the public sphere and about the need for kind of a design element to this. Would you like to unpack that for the audience a little bit in regards to Phil's comments?
Right. Well, I think I might go a little bit further actually than Phil, because I think, we have let private companies for profit design our public square with digital technologies that are distorting and undermining social cohesion. And if we want a digital public square that is good for democracy, good for social cohesion, we need to have social cohesion experts and people like Phil focused on the information environment, helping to design what that looks like. And so most of my research now is looking at the design affordances. What specifically does the technology allow you to do or allow you not to do? Because sometimes it's not putting in a reply button that is actually the key to reducing disinformation. And really understanding more how these technology platforms are very manipulative and persuasive. There's a lot of psychology behind the design of tech platforms. And they're not neutral. They're not just reflecting user content. They are incentivizing certain types of content. And that is altering our information environment. So if we want to be able to incentivize the best of humanity, the best of social cohesion, we need to design for that specifically. And I think more than a light touch, we need governments understanding the design principles behind the major platforms as they exist. And those platforms, in my opinion, they need to be taxed for the polarizing and populist impacts that they're having on society, causing distrust among each other and our governments. But I think then also we need to be having public funding for a digital public square that is actually good for social cohesion. So I think too many governments are focused on just content moderation and keeping users in check, and really not looking enough at the design of these platforms.
Lisa, all of that sort of leads me to, I think, the sort of a big question that I have on my mind for both of you. Perhaps we can begin with Phil about this year in particular. This year is famously the year of election, the year where, I don't know, there's 70 plus elections going on around the world. But this is, I think, perhaps one year in an ongoing story about democratic decline. As I've mentioned earlier, distrust in institutions, but specifically the institutions of election, the institutions of politics, the institutions that are in many ways defining the public sphere, defining collective decision making. What is the role of technology in all of this? Is there a hopeful story, Phil, for us to take away in this year? And I'd love then for Lisa to follow.
You're right. This is a sensitive year, and of course, there are more elections on the horizon. Beyond 2024. From the point of view of the IPIE, so the International Panel on the Information Environment, I think we've identified two ways that are critical to supporting a healthy information environment this year. And the first is to spend a significant amount of our own energy and to try to convince others to look at ways to diminish the impact of misinformation on elections administration. So the moment you start to say something about particular political leaders or in particular political parties, you'll lose one side, right, of any given polarizing issue in a particular country. But what's really pernicious, what really undermines democratic institutions, is when political leaders start to go after elections administrators themselves, or the process of gathering votes and collecting votes. And even with our wonderful technologies, the biggest countries around the world still take a day or two or three or five, right, to count all the ballots and to be able to say something confident. Defending that process, that's the beachhead that we really need to defend, to make sure that we protect the people who do the service of running an election. That's a critical thing. The second thing is that there are a few issues that are really transborder and global, and one of them, I think, is misinformation about climate science. So there's the scientific consensus is there about climate change. But we still get this messaging of misinformation about the causes and the consequences or the costs of doing something about misinformation about climate change. And it's a year of elections. It's also a year of extreme temperatures, of storms, of droughts, and floods, and famines. And so protecting public understanding of the climate crisis and sustaining public trust of the elections process, I think those are the two points of intervention that we at the IPIE think are most valuable.
Thank you, Phil. Lisa.
Well, I think I agree with everything that's just been said. The issue for me is, how do we start using this technology to be able to support the public in understanding even the election process? Because here in the United States, I know really there's very little understanding of the checks and balances of making sure our election results are safe and secure and fair. We've done a great job in the US of building that system, but much of the public is not aware of that. So I think that the major tech platforms could already be putting out public announcements to help educate the population about all the ways that our election officials have checks and balances from different political parties. So, there's a question I see that's come in about the use of AI to verify results. I'm not sure about, I haven't seen any research about AI verifying the accuracy of results, but I do know that the country of Taiwan, which has one of the most robust democracies, has a way of using AI or using technology to support the understanding of the public about how AI deepfakes work. And so they pre-bunked the possibility of disinformation on their election by pre-bunking what might happen, what kind of false rumors might happen. And again, I think our major tech platforms here in the United States and in other countries could do more to pre-bunk.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. We have a couple more minutes. I want to use those couple of minutes, maybe in about 30 seconds from each of you, to take a bit of a meta reflection. I don't want to put you in a box. You're both practitioners, policy experts, but I think at heart, academics. I remember, Phil, meeting you when you were at University of Washington, Lisa, when you were at Eastern Mennonite University. You've had academic journeys primarily. But this is also an era where the academic institutions, where academia has undergone a certain amount of skepticism from the public, either seen as being politically biased or sort of preoccupied with inane questions that don't have any practical value. What is the role of the academy in these kind of really big issues? Phil, first you, and then we can close out with Lisa.
Certainly. I think just in 30 seconds, I think our role is still critical in the sense that independent researchers are the sources of evidence about the problem and the solutions. I would say that the scientific community needs to spend as much time on the solutions as the evidence, because the evidence is really piling up. But if we want policymakers to make sensible decisions with evidence, right, that's something we can certainly help with. And so stepping up in that sense to generate the wisdom and deliver it in an accessible way, right? Not all the researchers do that, but making the stuff accessible, that's the critical mission for us.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that, and I would also say it's partly the researchers' fault for not taking their research to the policy centers and making the relevance of their research more understandable and relevant and actionable for policymakers. For throughout my academic career, I have gone to Washington, D.C. and gone to the United Nations and tried to translate my research into very specific policy recommendations that here's the solutions or here's what really needs to happen. And, you know, right now, I think that the design of technology platforms needs to be regulated by governments. The governments need to go beyond content moderation to focus on design. So I am going to the policy centers of the world and trying to make that point. And I wish other academics would do that. And I'm grateful for Phil's work and the focus on the information environment and how they are translating that research into policy relevance.
Thank you, Lisa. An appropriate rallying cry to end this conversation on. I want to thank you both for the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. I want to thank you for the work you did in this conversation to unpack all of these concepts for us. And thanks to Tech Change and the Global Digital Development Forum for having us all.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.